So good evening. Welcome to you both in Zoom land and here in the audience tonight to the November meeting of the Ozaukee Washington Birding Coalition. Not really a meeting, but a program. I sit on the board of the Lake Michigan Bird Observatory, so I was particularly pleased to invite Jacob Woulf, who's the MOTUS coordinator for the observatory, to be the speaker tonight. I'm also pleased that we have our development director, Jenny Bardeen, here in the audience with us as well. So you could stand up for those. Everybody. Both of these folks are doing wonderful work for the observatory. I want to tell you a little bit about one thing going on at the observatory as well. We're in the process of hiring a new employee to be the state program director for Bird City, Wisconsin. Bird City, Wisconsin, a program that encourages communities to do more good things for bird conservation. Is Bird City, Wisconsin. Originated right here in Wisconsin back in 2010. And it has become an official program, one of the pillar projects of the observatory. So we are in the process of hiring a new director for that program. So that is a very good thing to have going on here. Bird City, Wisconsin is now part of the Bird City Network. Bird City, Wisconsin helped foster programs in 9 other states. Bird City, Pennsylvania, Bird City, Colorado, Bird City, Texas, Illinois, Minnesota, Iowa. Slightly different names for a few of them, but they're all part of the Bird City Network, which is now being run jointly by Environment for the Americas and the American Bird Conservancy. And together, they have also taken the program on an international scale, on a hemisphere-wide scale. We just announced the second Bird City in Brazil. We also have one in Colombia and 2 in Mexico. So the next time you go to Cancun, it's a Bird City. But let me get to the program for tonight. I'm going to let Jacob tell you all about MOTUS, but I wanted to tell you a little bit about Jacob first. He graduated from UW Green Bay in 2019 with a bachelor's degree in animal biology and in 2022 with a master's degree in environmental science and policy. While there, he tracked movements of American white pelicans and double-crested cormorants during the breeding season, and we were lucky enough to hire him to help expand the MOTUS network in Wisconsin. So without any further ado, I'll turn this over to Jacob and let him tell you about the rest of it.
Excellent, thank you. Are we good to go in? Does it look good on the screen? All right, so this evening I'll talk to you guys about expanding the MOTUS wildlife tracking system, and more specifically, expanding the MOTUS wildlife tracking system in Wisconsin. I'll kind of give a background of different wildlife tracking methods, different bird tracking methods, and then I'll get to the kind of the meat of the presentation, talking about MOTUS. And then at the very end, I'll go to the MOTUS website, and I'll show you all kind of how to interact with that website. A lot of the data that's stored on the site and picked up from the different stations, a lot of that data is publicly accessible. So it's really a cool, website, really cool research that's going on. As Carl mentioned, my name is Jacob Woulf. I'm the MOTUS coordinator for Lake Michigan Bird Observatory. MOTUS is just one of our projects at the observatory. So if anyone's interested in learning more about MOTUS or any other projects that we're working on, you can visit www.lmbo.org. All right, as Carl mentioned, I graduated from UW Green Bay in 2019 with a bachelor's degree in animal biology, and in 2022 with a master's degree in environmental science and policy. While doing work with my master's degree, I studied movements of piscivorous birds, primarily double-crested cormorants and American white pelicans. My current role here began in January of 23, so just a little under 2 years. This picture of me here, I'm holding one of our test subjects from Green Bay. It's a pelican that just received a backpack GPS transmitter. So looking at wildlife tracking, looking at avian tracking, there are different ways that researchers can track birds as they migrate and as they travel to and from breeding grounds and as they are stopping over at rest habitats. Some of the more common ways people do these are by bird banding, radar studies, GPS transmitters, and then the specialized system for small migratory birds, or the MOTUS wildlife tracking system. First, we'll look at banding. Now, most people are probably familiar with bird banding because it's a very old method. I'm not saying it doesn't have its pros, but it's been around for a long time. It's well known. Most people, if you're familiar with nature reserves, you've probably come across a bird bander, or you've watched a bird banding event take place. Lots of birds get banded even today. Every year, thousands of birds get banded, probably tens of thousands of birds get banded. However, there are many limitations with bird banding. One of those limitations is that there's a very low recapture probability. So imagine if you were banding chickadees, and right here in Mequon, the chance that you would recapture that chickadee on the other side of Mequon would be very low. Now, look at that at a national level. The chance of that little bird flying into a net is very low. Now, again, it does happen, and the data that it gets collected from those recaptures is very good, but in general, the recapture probability is very low. The bands are also very tiny, and the birds move around a lot. They're very fast, so the band numbers are difficult to read and difficult to photograph. One other limitation from banding is that there's little to no spatial accuracy with these birds. So if a bird gets recaptured, you can clearly tell where the bird came from, but you don't necessarily know the route that it took. Very rarely does a bird go from point A to point B. It makes a lot of different stops in between, and there could be geographical barriers that this bird navigates around. So the spatial accuracy is very low. Next, looking at radar. This is a more recent technology that's been used to kind of give an image of where large amounts of birds are migrating through. A high density of birds are needed to be able to pick these things up on radar. And that's because, or with that, there's very little, or you can't track birds at an individual level. Because if you were able to track birds at an individual level, then radar would be able to detect every single possible object, and that map would look like a complete mess. So when you look at these spots, you can see the darker blue centers. That indicates a large mass of birds that are to be moving. Even though it doesn't give you individualized tracking, this is important for if a town ordinance or a city might want to enact, say, a lights out movement to protect birds as they migrate through. So if a state or a city or a town recognizes that a large number of birds are moving through an area via radar, then that might be a time where a lights out ordinance might be put in place. And again, individualized tracking of birds is impossible with that. So next we look at GPS transmitters, and if the funding is there for a researcher, GPS transmitters are by far the best way to track a bird because it gives an abundance of spatial data and abundance of time data also relating to those spatial locations. So GPS transmitters, there's a high degree of spatial accuracy, so you can literally tell exactly where this bird is at any given time, which is always a plus. These transmitters are also able to be programmed to meet a researcher's needs. So say, for example, you're studying a nocturnal species, you can program these transmitters to only transmit at night. Now, maybe you're interested to see if this nocturnal species moves around during the day at all. Well, you could also program this transmitter to transmit at night, but also maybe every 4 hours during the day, just to see if this bird is moving around at all during the day. So you can really program these things to whatever you want to. With these, there's local tracking data that you can obtain, as well as migration tracking. So you're not really limited to geographic range or area. And they're also designed to transmit for the duration of the life of the bird. So as you can see here, this is another image. This is one of our pelicans from Green Bay. This is a transmitter you can see here on the back of the bird. This is battery powered, but it also has a solar panel that recharges the battery. So as long as there isn't any mud or there isn't any, or there aren't feathers that cover this thing, this will recharge and it will last for the entire life of the bird. Now, unfortunately, we have to take a small step back because even though MOTUS is really cool, and that's what we're going to talk about next, we can't get near as robust data as we can from the GPS transmitters. And that's just because the birds that are being tagged with MOTUS tags are much smaller, so they can't hold a big GPS transmitter, and so we're more limited to what kind of transmitter that we can put on these birds. So, welcome to MOTUS. The MOTUS Wildlife Tracking System is an international collaborative research network that uses a coordinated automated radio telemetry array to track the movement and behavior of small flying animals. That sounds really complex, but it's actually quite simple. All it basically is, and I'll get into the more technical side of things here in a second, but all it basically is are very small radio tags that are placed on the back of a bird, sometimes the foot, depending on the species, but a lot of times it's on the back. And when this bird carrying a transmitter flies within range of a MOTUS station, you can see an image here. I'll have some more examples coming up. But when it flies within range of a MOTUS station, then the station detects the tag and it logs the tag information at a receiving module that's at the site. So, MOTUS station equipment. Again, that all sounded very kind of complex, but it really is quite simple. It's radio technology, and it's kind of interesting because radio technology isn't necessarily obsolete, but has been being used less and less. But once this MOTUS system came on the scene, it really started taking off again. So the main components of the MOTUS station are the antennas. These are directional antennas, so they're directional and receive only. So that means these antennas, whichever direction they're facing, that's the only direction they can detect in. So a lot of times we have multiple antennas on the station so we can get a broad coverage of the area. There are receiving modules for each MOTUS station, and that's what you see right here. And the antennas are connected to the receiving module via coaxial cable. And so the signal that gets detected by the antennas runs down the coaxial cable, and then it gets stored on the receiving module. There's also a power source needed, and that either comes in the form of just a regular AC adapter, or if we're off the grid like this Washington Island station right here, then we use a deep cycle battery with a solar panel. Lastly, one of the most important structures is the mounting structure, where we're going to mount the antennas to, and that varies a lot. Most of our setups have different mounting structures. You can see this one here is a tripod tower on Washington Island, and this is one at Kingfisher Farm near Manitowoc, and this is actually a light pole that we put on a concrete footing. So it varies a lot depending on what's available at the site and what we can actually put up. So MOTUS transmitters, these are obviously the things that we're putting on the birds. There are two different frequencies, or two primary frequencies that are used in North America, and you can see these right here. So this bird here is carrying a 434 megahertz transmitter, and this bird over here is carrying a 166.38 megahertz transmitter. And I'll back up just real quick and mention that most of our stations have 5 antennas. There's 3 of the 166 megahertz antennas and 2 of the 434. And those 2 different frequencies align with the different types of frequencies that the birds are carrying. Now, the size range of these tags is from about 0.2 grams to any size. They can really be made to be as big as you want. But again, once you start getting into the size of bird that can carry a GPS transmitter, if the funding is there, you might as well use GPS transmitters because, again, that data set is just so much more robust than what you get from MOTUS tags. Similar to the GPS transmitters, these tags can be programmed, but not to the same degree as the GPS transmitters. So all these tags work is they're constantly emitting a pulse, and that pulse can be specified as a time. The time between pulses can be specified based on the researcher's needs. So I'll give you an example. If say you're studying hummingbirds, that tag is going to be very small. Now, with a small tag like that, your battery is going to be very small as well. So if this tag is constantly pulsing, then that battery is going to last for a very short amount of time. And so that tag might run out of battery life before the bird even reaches the wintering grounds. On the other hand, if you want to conserve battery life and you set this tag pulse to once every 10 minutes, well, the battery might last a lot longer, but that bird might fly in and out of range of the station before being detected. So there's kind of a happy medium that has to be struck with the species that you're working with. The maximum detection range of a MOTUS station is approximately 12 miles, and that's on the very far end. There are only a few documented instances where 12 miles was actually confirmed. I would say a more average maximum detection distance is about 7 to 8 miles. That's probably closer to the...
Is that in all directions?
Generally, wherever the antenna is facing. So with those 434, we have two antennas that are facing 180 degrees apart, and then with the 166, they're spaced at 120 degrees apart. So generally, there's a little bit more coverage there. In a perfect situation, we'd have 4 antennas of each type, but we're also trying to weigh in cost. And with having that 4 antennas for each one, the cost goes up significantly. So again, it's always trying to find that balance of cost to how many antennas can we put on here and still contribute a lot to the network. When we're talking about MOTUS, we kind of follow these 3 steps here with the end result in hopefully establishing our own tagging project. But first, we always look at the partners and where we can establish partnerships with. This is by far the most important aspect of it, even before funding, because it really does make all of this possible. Us at Lake Michigan Bird Observatory, we don't own any land. So if MOTUS towers were only placed on land that we own, we wouldn't have any stations. So these host sites, these partners, are the most important aspect of this. Not only for establishing a MOTUS station, but a lot of times they might have funding available to help us cover the cost of some of these stations. Which, just as a side note, stations generally cost between $3,000 and $5,000, but that can change a lot depending on what's needed. If a contractor needs to be hired out, or if like a more serious structure needs to be installed before actually installing these stations. Next, once the partners are established, then we can start talking about funding a station and actually installing these receivers. And another important thing that we look at for installing receivers is looking at establishing transects. These transects help us cover the most amount of ground while limiting the number of stations that we put out, because again, these are very expensive. So we want to cover the maximum amount of area possible while spending the least amount of money as possible. And again, that just goes to ensure coverage. And then lastly, once the partners and the receivers are established, then organizations and researchers can start looking at tags and tagging projects. These tagging projects they have to be connected to a specific scientific research question. So you can't just say, oh, I want to study bluebirds and just put some tags on and see where they go. you can't just say that. You have to have a specific scientific research question that you're looking to answer. And then once you have that and you get the go-ahead from the bird banding lab, especially trained banders are also needed to place these tags, and then special permissions are also needed at local and federal levels. These numbers are just a touch outdated. I don't know, some of these numbers, like a number of projects and things, there are more than this, but this slide was made a while ago. But when the slide was made, MOTUS was in 5 continents. It was in 34 countries. There were 1,453 MOTUS receiver stations, 312 different species tagged, nearly 40,000 animals tagged, 600 research projects, just over 1,700 MOTUS partners and collaborators, and a little under 200 publications. And again, a lot of those numbers are even higher than that now. Looking at the current status of MOTUS, this is at, of course, the global scale. You can see that the vast majority of the MOTUS stations are located in North America. Zooming in a little bit to North America, you can see that the vast majority of those stations are within the northeastern portion of the continent. There's a growing number of stations out west, but again, there's less population out there, and geographical barriers are higher out there than there are here over in the eastern part of the United States. And then zooming in to Wisconsin, you can see this is our current setup of MOTUS stations. We have just about all of Lake Michigan covered with only a few gaps. One of our project partners in Illinois, he did a really good job here of filling out these stations. I shouldn't say he, it's the organization in general, but they did a very good job of filling out these stations here along the Illinois-Wisconsin border. But looking back, this is just to give you an example. In 2023, we really made a lot of progress with installing MOTUS stations. So this is, in January 2023, this is what the map looked like. And then going back here to 2024, you can see the difference, like switch back and forth. I believe at this point in 2023, in January of 23, we only had 8 stations in the state. Right now we have 26. So a lot has happened in just a little under 2 years. This is just a general overview of our current plan. It's kind of a pixelated map, but this is what was drawn from the Midwest Migration Network. I mentioned before about transects, and that, again, limits the number of stations that we put out, but it ensures the maximum amount of coverage that we can get. It helps us keep cost in mind. We're looking at building out some east-west fence lines. One in particular that runs from about the north end of Lake Winnebago out to Lake Michigan, and then up through Eau Claire area, and then out by the Twin Cities. And then the other one will kind of be centered around Madison, and then straight east to the Mississippi, or straight west to the Mississippi, and straight east to Lake Michigan. If I back up, you can kind of see the start of both of those lines. You can see here, this will be our southernmost east-west fence line, and then this will be our northernmost east-west fence line here. A couple more stations will be added into this fence line this year. We have one that's scheduled to go up at the Oneida Reservation, and then we have Wapaka Eco Park will be going up as well, and then we have one more Sustainable Great Lakes station, which will be going up right here at the new zoo in Swampo. This is just kind of a more streamlined version of the map that I just showed before. And then the highlighted dots here, this is the project that's just finishing up. This was a grant that our organization received that supported 16 MOTUS stations, and we just have a couple of those left to put up. Again, that's going to be at the new zoo in Swampo and then at the Oneida Reservation. But all the rest of these stations are installed, and again, that focused on Lake Michigan, and it seeks to expand the benefits of MOTUS. So that's the end of my MOTUS presentation. What I want to do now is I want to go to the MOTUS website and just show how to navigate the website, zoom into different stations and show how interactive this website is. Where you can click on each station, you can click on the birds that have been detected, and you can see kind of different migration routes that these have taken. But before that, before I jump into that, I just want to ask online and in the audience if there are any questions that people have that I could answer.
How exactly are the tags attached? Are they glued on, tied on?
They're usually tied on. I forget the exact material. There certainly are people that would know more than I do, but I believe one of the materials is called Stretch Magic. It makes a little figure 8 pattern, and it goes through the wings. Material goes through the wings and through the legs of the bird, and then the transmitter seats nicely in the back. And then Carl asked who was responsible for the fence line that's on the Wisconsin-Illinois border, and that is the University of Illinois Champaign-Urbana, I believe, is the group that's kind of taking action on that.
Sorry, another question maybe might become more apparent as you go through the MOTUS data, but how exactly does the data work with the projects? I mean, does somebody come up with a project and then do you need to get like more birds for it, or do you just try to ban as many birds as you have and then the data's out there for people to come and use for projects, or like your pelican project?
Yeah.
Once you're done with that, I mean, the transmitters are still on the birds. Is somebody else using that data or still gathering that data, or?
Yeah. So the question was basically, essentially project management, right? And what happens like with the data after the life of the tag is done and whatnot. So the transmitters, say the Pelican project, for example, slowly either the transmitters get too dirty or the bird dies, or eventually something happens with the transmitter where it no longer transmits. And the idea is to keep collecting that data all the way up until the end of the life of the transmitter. Even after projects are over with, a lot of times researchers are still interested in that data and they still use the data for as long as they can. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Yes, thanks.
The technology that like Alice Mann and some of those other people have, where they have receiving in their homes and stuff,
Yeah.
is that at all the same kind of technology that you're using here?
Now, do people like that use the audio?
Yeah, it's acoustic.
Okay, acoustic. The question was, is this similar to the acoustic? That's a completely different study. So what they're listening for is listening for the different tones of each bird as they fly over, and then they analyze that. This is merely a presence-absence base. So as soon as that bird flies over, when the station logs that data, the tag has a very unique signal that it transmits, so then that station knows what bird flew over.
There's
Nick?
quite a few questions on Zoom here. One asked, what happens to a predator that kills or eats the bird with the transmitter? Do they eat around it, or does anyone really know, or has there been any anecdotal evidence of that?
I actually don't know the exact answer to that, but I say banding, for example, I know bands have been found in owl pellets, so I don't know if, I think the chances that it would be fully ingested are probably fairly low, but I don't know for sure. I suppose it's possible that it can happen, yeah, I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if there's been any evidence really one way or the other.
And then another one was, can MOTUS towers be co-located on cell towers?
Yes, so the question was, can MOTUS towers be co-located on cell towers? We actually just did that a few weeks ago on Chambers Island. We were working with Door County Land Trust, and then Cellcom and Ensight. They helped us put the antennas on the cell tower at Chambers Island. So that was really cool. I, of course, did not climb. I don't have the licensing and permissions to climb towers, nor would I want to go up on a cell tower. But yes, they can be co-located on them.
I know this this question was answered online, but what does MOTUS mean for the folks that are out there?
It's derived from Latin meaning movement. I have to put that on my presentation because that question gets asked every time. I'm not bothered by it, but it gets asked every time, and it's a sign to put it on the next presentation.
So it's not abbreviated, it's not an acronym or abbreviation?
No.
It's actually a word that...
Yeah, yeah.
And then another individual asked, wouldn't so when you're creating those fences across the state or up and down the coast, wouldn't it be best for towers to be every 8 miles if that's their only distance?
Yes. Generally, we try to have them overlap a little bit, but it would be 16 miles would be about that because it's 8 miles one way. And it's not a perfect science either. Sorry, so the question was if the range is 8 miles, should we have the stations be spaced every 8 miles? The ideal range, if we're looking at that number, would be 16 miles, just because 8 miles one way. But it's not a perfect science, and even if there are stations that are closer than 8 miles and there's partners that want to host stations, we never turn people away. So, for example, in Milwaukee, we have one that's at the zoo, and then we have one at Urban Ecology Center at Riverside Park. And so those are certainly closer than 8 miles apart. So that's, again, that's not, quote, ideal range, but interestingly, these stations, even though they can be spaced close together, they oftentimes pick up different tags for whatever reason. It's kind of an interesting thing. So for that reason alone, that's evidence that we shouldn't turn people away for installing MOTUS stations. And even at, I believe it's Woodland Dunes, they have 2 MOTUS stations that are within just a couple miles of each other. One station is really productive, the other one isn't. Maybe it's a lot of interference, a lot of radio noise. Maybe it's just different factors that influence that. I'm not exactly sure, but the stations are very unique, and some stations pick up a lot more tags than others do. Any other questions online?
Nope, that was the last one for now.
All right, so I can go over and switch over.
While Jacob's doing that, let me just interject that he's been much too modest about his own role in all of this. He is the reason that we've made light years worth of progress. The observatory was the initial actor in the state in trying to move MOTUS out of the Northeast and bring it to Wisconsin. And other actors have gotten involved as well, but the observatory has been the leading force in getting this done, and Jacob has been the leading force behind the leading force. So if anybody is doing their year-end philanthropic planning, you could keep the observatory and MOTUS in mind. So I said as a board member.
This is the MOTUS website. Again, this is just motus.org. And once you get on here, you'll see this screen that just looks like a unrefined map with a bunch of yellow dots. And so you just have to zoom in a little bit here. And once you zoom in, you'll start to see the individualized MOTUS stations start to take place. Now there we go, loading here. So these stations are very interactive. Again, what you can do, you can click on these stations and you can see how many birds each station has detected, and then you can look at each bird and you can get a rough idea of the route that these birds have taken if there's enough pings from each bird, if they went by enough towers. So what we'll do here, let's do Bose Elementary School. This station is in Kenosha, and so what we can do is after we click on the yellow dot, we'll look at the tags detected row, and you'll see here that there's 3 tags detected, and we want to look at that in a table format. And you can see here, this gives the tag deployment, the tag ID, and then the species that was detected, and then it'll tell you the date deployed, and then the detection date is all the way over on the left side of that table. So you can see this station detected 2 Swainton's thrushes in the fall of 2023, and then it just recently detected a sharp-shinned hawk. So if we go through, let's look at this first thrush here. This will give us a little bit more information. Here you can see, again, this tag ID, the project, the time the deployment was started, the species, and then the location it was tagged at. And then this days detected and receivers detected by is also important information. When you look at receivers detected by, the higher this is, the better, because that just gives you a more refined idea of where this bird traveled at a more refined route. So let's look at this individual over a map. So you can click on, down here where this says show detections in, you can click on a map. And then we will scroll down. And as you can see, this is a very interesting bird. Our stations do pick up a decent amount of Swainton's thrushes. I don't know exactly if it's the most, the highest frequency that we pick up, but we certainly do pick up enough. You can see that these birds, a lot of times, I believe these are the fall migrations, they make these huge dog-legging migration routes. They cut straight down, kind of, this one did kind of in the Florida area, and then it flew up in the spring in a more westerly trajectory. It didn't really, it didn't go as far east as it would have as it went in the fall. So very, very cool there. If we look at another one of those thrushes, you can look at a map, scroll down. We don't have as much data with this one, but as you can see, a very similar migration out here. This one was actually detected, let's see, I gotta move my zoom window around here. This one was actually detected by 2 of our stations in Wisconsin. Up by Forest Beach, I believe, and then by Kenosha. I'll show one more here. This sharp-shinned hawk that was detected at this station this year. This is a relatively new project that just started this year. It was a project that works with raptors at Cedar Grove. You can see this bird was detected at Cedar Grove, of course, that's where it departed from. But then it was picked up here by Kenosha, and then Illinois, and then it went either across the lake. I believe it actually probably went up or down and around. I saw some of the data, I think, from the GPS transmitters that were put on some of these birds, and I believe they go around the lake. So again, that doesn't really give you a perfect estimate of where the bird traveled, but you can see that it was detected here over in Michigan. So still really cool data that is presented here.
A question, are there no MOTUS towers around the bottom of the lake, or are they there and then you just miss the bird, or?
Yeah, so the question was, are there no MOTUS stations around the bottom of the lake, or are they there and they just missed the bird? Most likely they just missed the bird. There are definitely stations down there. If I zoom in, I keep moving this window around here. If you zoom in here, you can see the bottom part of the lake. There are stations down there, but the stations just likely missed it. If they're near a city, for example, there can be a lot of radio noise, and that bird might have to fly really close to the station to be detected. So there are a lot of reasons why the tag might not have been picked up. Sometimes these stations appear like they're active, but they might not actually be active. They might just show a station that was active a year or two ago, and they might not be kept up. So there are a couple different reasons why they might not have been detected.
Is that Bose station fairly new, because it started in 2023, so I don't know, it's 2023 when most of these came up, or is there older data out
so most of these were installed in 2023. The 8 that were installed prior, they kind of were all over the place. If we look at this Forest Beach station, you can see that this one has detected 34 tags over the course of about 5 years, almost 6 years. So if we look at this table, you can see that there's a lot of different birds that were detected at this station. Most stations were installed last year, but there were a few that were installed prior to last year.
Question from Zoom, on birds that are high in altitude, how does that affect detection?
So the question was birds that are high in altitude, how does that affect detection? I don't know exactly how high these can necessarily reach, but I do know that it's better that the birds are higher above the trees than, say, in a tree line or like flying through thick cover, or say if they're stopping over somewhere that's really thick and the antenna can't detect. Because a lot of times these tags, if they're obstructed by buildings or thick cover or trees and stuff, the detection range goes down dramatically. Or anytime there's an extra barrier added for that antenna then to read through, it's the detection range goes down considerably. So I don't know exactly how high these things can detect. I know generally speaking, if you envision kind of like an invisible cone that goes out kind of vertically and horizontally, there's that, but I don't know to the extent of that cone. And again, there are a lot of factors that influence that as well.
Is it affected by rain or snow or anything, or is weather not really affected?
It is affected by water. So some of these stations, a lot of these stations are close to the lake. So sometimes that can benefit the tag detection, and sometimes it can hurt the tag detection. So sometimes the tag detection can bounce off the water in a positive way, where it's amplified, but sometimes the water can absorb it or deflect it in a different direction, and so then of course that affects it negatively.
So how many people are there in the area who actually are trained to attach these tags? Is there like just a handful? Do you have to go to training? I mean, is there training class? I'm just curious.
Yeah. So the question was how many people in the area are trained to attach these transmitters. It's a very small amount, actually, because not only do you have to be licensed or under a sub-committee to ban the birds, but then you have to be specially trained to attach these transmitters. And so the number of those people in this area is fairly small. I can only think of a couple, 2 or 3 people that I know in the state. I'm sure there are a few more than that, but the people that I know of, I don't know of that many. So there's not enough people trained, in my opinion. But it's a tough thing. I know I went to a workshop 5 or 6 years ago that was talking about MOTUS and learning about MOTUS, and I had the opportunity to put a tag on a bird, and I didn't like it at all. I've held birds before, but I'm not a trained professional to handle birds. But not only do you have to know how to handle a bird, you have to really know how to hold it, rotate it, and it was very stressful, and I didn't want to do it. So, Carl.
Amber Roth is out at the University of Maine and studies golden winged warblers. She used to be here in Wisconsin and up in Michigan and has been involved with the observatory. Is she still banding golden wings up in northern Wisconsin?
The question was, is Amber Roth still banning tagging golden wings up in northwestern or northern Wisconsin? I don't believe she is. I could be wrong, but I'm fairly certain she's not.
Have we had any
Al Sherko says yes, Amber is banning.
Oh, so yes, she is.
Okay.
I was wrong. Yeah.
Our online audience.
Al knows all.
Have we picked up any of them? Do you know?
Yes. Let's see. Yeah, there's a couple different projects here. Let's see, I'm pretty sure one came through.
Yeah, I see it there, about fifth from the top.
Oh yeah, yep. So right here.
Oh, yeah, University of Maine, that's what she said.
So this one, let's see, deployment
Just
started.
minimize that window instead of moving it around. Yeah.
The deployment was started here 2021, 5/18, and so this bird unfortunately didn't have that many detections. So if we click on this map here, you can see that it was detected at, I think this is Woodland Dunes, and then it was detected at Forest Beach. But that was one of, I can't remember if I think there are a couple others, but I'd have to really search to see
Yeah.
where they were.
No, I was just curious.
Yeah,
But that's very interesting bird being studied right here in Wisconsin. So
Yes.
having that fence line eventually across the two levels of the state is going to be really important.
yes, and then I didn't mention, but we're also looking at starting our own purple martin tagging project. We're in the works of applying for funding and looking at different partnerships that we can form to get that going. So hopefully within the next year or two, we can start getting that off the ground and start getting a really good idea of how that's going to look.
Can I just toss in one other observation?
Yeah.
You know, this is sort of, two sort of phrases come to mind. If you build it, they will come. If you build it, we will be able to detect them, but the ability to detect them means that more researchers will be able to get funds to tag them.
Yes,
And so one project builds on the other in terms of moving forward. I think that's the long-term hope of the observatory, is that by building out this MOTUS network and fence lines, we will help researchers be able to demonstrate that they can answer questions, because they will be able to have a better chance of being able to tag birds on their entire migration route.
yes, and that's the other thing too, is researchers, or I should say funders, don't want to necessarily tag or fund tagging projects if the infrastructure isn't there to detect them.
Right. Absolutely.
I just wanted to add, Jacob mentioned that we're pursuing grants to get funding for tags for the Purple Martins. We also have a calendar fundraiser currently to raise money for those tags, so we can start that project.
Yes, so Jenny said that not only are we applying for funding, applying for grants to support MOTUS tags for Purple Martins, but she said we also have a calendar fundraiser going on right now that will help provide funds for that as well.
These are calendars put together by Kate Redmond, and they feature not only her photography, but that of Joel Trick and Jacob, and several other great photographers. Beautiful wall calendars available on the website.
And then we've kind of talked about this, but just like maybe like how species are specifically chosen to receive these tags.
Sure. So the question was how species are specifically chosen to receive these tags. It really does come down to the researcher level. And so if a researcher, say, has a need, we'll use a rare example like Kirtland's warbler. It's a species that its populations are very low. They are increasing, which is good, but someone might really want to learn exactly where these birds are migrating through. And so if they put a project together where we're going to put MOTUS tags on these Kirtland's warbler, we want to really refine where these birds are passing through, where they're stopping over to refuel and rest, so we can preserve those areas. That would be an example. So the idea, of course, is avian conservation, and how can you apply avian conservation in general to your MOTUS project, is essentially what it is. So it really can be any species, but there has to be a very specific scientific research question that you're looking to answer.
So why did you choose purple martins? Because they're at Forest Beach, or because you have
Well,
a specific question you
Well,
want to answer?
the question was, why do we choose purple martins to look into a tagging project for? partially because they're at Forest Beach and that it's opportunistic. But interestingly, with purple martins, they rely solely on human-made nest structures to survive, and not a lot of information is known on these birds. And so, looking at these fall roost sites when they gather by the thousands, by the tens of thousands, looking at their migration routes, departure dates, all these different things. And then we also have several different partners that host sites. We have a purple martin bander that we know very well, who would be interested in collaborating. So it's kind of the science aspect behind it, it's the opportunistic with the different colonies that are around, and then it's the people that we know that would help us with the banding and with the transmitter attachment.
I would also add that purple martins are a species of greatest conservation need. So they are not yet listed as endangered or threatened in the state, but our goal is to keep them from getting to that listing. So.
Yeah.
Very good.
So when we see the migration maps on eBird, those are coming from just individuals reporting that bird, is that correct? Or how do they do their maps?
I don't really know. I've never really looked that much at eBird migration maps.
They're fascinating.
Are they? Forgive me for not knowing them.
Well,
Sorry.
oh,
I just remembered seeing your migration maps for the pelican site
Yeah.
we're studying, and also one of the other birds you showed, that they, I don't know if this is just coincidence or, very small data point here, but they migrated in the fall down from Florida and then I don't know if they went to Cuba or whatever, but like from Florida to the Yucatan, but then in the spring they went up along the coast of Mexico. Is that just chance, or is there some reason for that, or I don't know if you...
Yeah. So
so.
the question was referring back to migration routes, more specifically the pelican migration route and how it went down through Florida, across through Cuba, and then to the Yucatan. But then in the spring, it went up on the eastern side of the Gulf, or the western side of the Gulf. I think that there is a reason for it, but I don't know the reason for it. Each bird is also an individual, and so they have their own, I don't know if personality is the right word, but they have their own preferences on when they migrate and how they migrate and the different routes that they take. It could be food related. It could be that they have a favorite refueling spot that's on the way up that they like to hit. Maybe that resource isn't available in the fall on the way down.
A genetic artifact of these birds that originally inhabited locations in much farther east, and so that they were used to generations and generations ago, they were used to migrating on this more easterly route, and their program is still somehow come back to that route to get to where they want to go, but they have to make this long dogleg east.
So kind of like a historic route.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I don't know how that's genetically encoded in them, but I mean, birds are genetically encoded to know where to migrate. Witness, sandpipers, they don't migrate with their parents or anything else. They just know the route to go from the far Arctic to the tropics.
Sure. Yeah. All right. If there's no other questions, I think we're good to dismiss people. Like I said, if anyone has any questions or they want to learn more about MOTUS, they can either visit the MOTUS website. We have some information on our website as well at lmbo.org. Really appreciate everybody who tuned in over Zoom and came out here in person.
And before you go away on Zoom, we just want everybody to know that we want to thank Jacob on behalf of the Cut Right Bird Club, a small honorarium.